I've kind of been avoiding doing this one because it's not a nice one. So today we're going to be talking about Gertrude Baniszewski and Sylvia Likens. If you do not recognize those names, you may recognize the movie by Ellen Page and Catherine Keener called An American Crime. It came out a few years ago. A lot of people were really surprised after they saw the movie that yes, it really did happen. It really was a real honest to goodness crime. It happened in 1965 in Indiana. Here's the facts. Gertrude Baniszewski was born Gertrude Nadine von Fossen. She grew up with a pretty normal life, a pretty normal kid. Up until the age of 11, her dad did have a heart attack and she literally watched him die right in front of her. And 5 years later, she dropped out of school to go marry John Baniszewski, who was a deputy police officer. They had 6 kids together before finally getting a divorce, and then a few years later she met Dennis Wright, who was 23 at the time. At this point she was 34. She had 1 child with him before he suddenly just disappeared, leaving her with 7 children and no money and no way to make money. During all this time, an anger was building up in her, but nobody really knows why. It was just about her choices or the world around her. Something made her incredibly angry. In walks Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Likens was a really nice 16-year-old girl who, with her younger sister Jenny, were the daughters of carnies. So while her parents were off in different carnivals, the 2 of them would stay with different family members or different boarders, and their parents would send money weekly just to cover costs for them to live in the house and eat and whatever else. They did this so the kids that would have to be going to city and not stay in school, so they could stay in one place, do school, make some friends, and have a normal life while their parents were off at carnival. In May of 1965, her father was leaving to go with the carnival, so he was looking for somebody to board the girls while he was away. One day, Sylvia and Jenny met a girl named Patte Baniszewski who brought them over to her house, and they were singing along with the Beatles and just chit-chatting through the afternoon. Her father, after a while, didn't know where they were, went to find them, and found them at the Baniszewski's house. So he sat down with Gertrude and he said, you know what, my daughters already like your kids. How about you board my daughters for the next several months, and I'll send $20 a week to cover the cost of food and anything else that is required for them to live in your house. And she said, okay, but just so you know, I'm strict. I keep a tight schedule with these kids. Oh sure, feel free to discipline them and keep them in line. And Gertrude Baniszewski said, I absolutely can. They stayed in the house for about a month, and the checks were arriving regularly of $20 a week, and everything was fine. And then one week the check didn't arrive on the day that she thought it would. So Gertrude decided to spank Sylvia and Jenny in recompense for the lost wages of having to feed and keep them in her home for that week. The check arrived the next day, and she told them to expect the exact same thing if the check was late again. But since she'd already begun the process of hurting them and found that she really liked it, she literally found any possible excuse to hurt those girls. Especially Sylvia, because Jenny, the younger sister, was crippled by polio. So if Sylvia could take the punishment for her, she did. And since Gertrude found a certain amount of happiness as she liked hurting somebody, and since Sylvia was saying, give it to me anyway rather than give it to my sister, she did. By August, the abuse had escalated so far that Sylvia was basically living in the basement, had very little food, very little water to live off of, and was being beaten by all of Gertrude's children, except for the 10-month-old who couldn't stand up on his own to beat her. The youngest child from 10 years old up to Paula, who was about 17, were all beating Sylvia on a regular basis, as well as 2 neighborhood boys who would come over and practice their karate on her, and Gertrude would put out cigarettes on Sylvia's skin. Now, most people would say in that amount of time, why did she stay? Because up until about August or mid-September, she totally could have left. However, the reason why she stayed lies with her little sister. She took Jenny's punishments in the early days to hopefully be able to guard her little sister from having to have that happen to her. And as the other kids in the house learned that if she wasn't beating Sylvia, she'd probably be beating one of them, Jenny learned that too. And Sylvia learned that if she didn't take the punishment, it would probably go to her sister. So she stayed and she stayed and she stayed, and then when it got really bad that she was honestly worried about dying, she was too weak to leave. If she had left, she knew that it would immediately start in on Jenny. So even to the last, when she was broken and beaten and swollen all over, she was still trying to protect her little sister. From August to the end of October, Sylvia was beaten and burned and tortured in that basement day after day after day for everyone else's amusement, and there was nothing anybody in that house could do, because if you said no, it is entirely possible that you could have joined her in that basement. So you said yes and yes and yes. Not that any of those kids felt remorseful about it afterward. They were doing what their mom said, and there's a certain amount of group theory. It was about mid-October of 1965. when Gertrude realized that Sylvia is probably going to die. So to guarantee that she did not go to jail for that, on October 21st, Gertrude went down into the basement with several other kids and had them hold down Sylvia while she heated up a needle and carved "I'm a prostitute and proud of it" into Sylvia's stomach. The very next day, she woke Sylvia up and forced her to write a letter saying that she had wanted to have sex with a whole bunch of different guys and they beat her up like she wanted. Like, this is the kind of crazy sex that she was involved in, and she got exactly what she wanted, and everything that was on her body was a result of that one encounter. The next day, Sylvia overheard Gertrude and some of the boys in the family talking about how they were going to carry her out to the woods and leave her there to die, to prove that Sylvia had run away, that she hadn't killed her, that this was all just a crazy sex act of Sylvia's. Sylvia, hearing this, broke out of the basement and ran to the front door. Just as she stepped out on the porch, Gertrude caught her, dragged her back out of the basement, and attempted to beat her, accidentally hit herself, and instead gave the bat to one of the neighborhood boys, who began beating Sylvia over the head well past unconsciousness. A couple of days after that, they pulled Sylvia out of the basement to wash her body, probably because she was beginning to smell and they didn't have to deal with that. When they pulled her out of the water, however, they realized that she wasn't breathing. So Gertrude told one of her boys to go call the police because she was like, "It's okay. She's branded. I have the letter. They will never think it was me." The police arrive and they look at her and they look at this letter and they're kind of like, a lot of these wounds are way too old to just be within one encounter. There's different stages of healing going on here, but nobody was saying anything because the kids were all afraid of Gertrude. But just before they left, Jenny, Sylvia's little sister, ran up to one of them and said, "Get me out of here and I will tell you everything." And they put her in the car and they took her to the police station. Gertrude, her oldest daughter Paula, her oldest son John, and the two neighbor boys were all arrested for first-degree murder. On October 26, 1965, Sylvia Likens died of a brain hemorrhage, shock, and malnutrition. The brain hemorrhage and shock having to do with the fact that her largest organ, her skin, was severely damaged by all the feces that she was covered in, and all the scarring, and all the burns, and all the beatings. And because they really weren't feeding her, her body did not have the fuel that was necessary to fix her injuries. So her body just gave up. After the trial, Gertrude was found guilty of first-degree murder and given a life sentence. Paula, her first daughter, was convicted of second-degree murder and also given a life sentence. And her oldest son, John, and the two neighborhood boys were convicted of manslaughter and given 2 to 21 years because they were minors. And Paula and Gertrude were allowed to have a second trial because during the time of the initial trial, the entire country was going crazy over this case. So they felt that maybe their sentencing wasn't fair. So they decided to do a retrial. In this new trial, Paula confessed her part and therefore was convicted of manslaughter and released 2 years later. However, Gertrude was again found guilty of first-degree murder and given another life sentence. However, in 1985, she came up for parole, and although there was a public outcry and Sylvia Likens' family came out against it, Gertrude Baniszewski was released on parole because although prison psychiatrists had found that she was a sadist, they'd also found that she had been a model prisoner while inside. She moved to Iowa. She changed her name back to her maiden name, except she dropped the Gertrude, so now it was Nadine von Fossen, and she lived out her days until June 16th, 1990, when she died of lung cancer from all those cigarettes. So now we get into the question of why. Just like Yelling at Concrete asked about a fictional criminal profile, we still have to apply these to a real crime. But we already have the second half of the equation. Who did she kill? That's Sylvia Likens. Now we have to find out why she killed her. Although there have never been any concrete beliefs as to why she killed Sylvia Likens, the general belief is that Sylvia Likens was a 16-year-old pretty girl who reminded Gertrude of herself. She was a 16-year-old pretty girl when she dropped out of school and married John Baniszewski. So the only thing that she could do was rail against herself in all her anger. There's a belief that she felt like that was her very first mistake and she hated her life and she didn't know how to get out of it. So here's this person who is, you know, the personification of who she used to be and all the mistakes that she made to end up with this horrible life. So she felt like she was putting all her anger onto her, not seeing Sylvia as Sylvia, but seeing Sylvia as a receptacle for all of her anger, and she liked when Sylvia screamed, and she liked when Sylvia cried, as if she was glad to hear the former version of herself screaming and crying in pain. Because, yes, you should feel bad for making the decisions that landed me here. So yes, I'm going to hurt you again. Because you one day turned into me and I hate you for that. And then there's also the speculation that she was just a sadist. She just really liked hurting other people. And Sylvia was there and was okay with being hurt as long as it wasn't her sister. So she said, oh, okay, you want to be hurt? Then let's hurt ya. As I said, there was a movie starring Ellen Page and Catherine Keener called An American Crime. There are also several books and plays about this crime as well, or based loosely on this crime. I'll have a link as well in case you want to buy and or watch An American Crime. As I said, this is not an easy thing to watch. This is not an easy thing to talk about. I really honestly did come up with the idea to do this video about 2 weeks ago, and I put it off and put it off and put it off because it's not an easy subject to talk about. So I ask you, which of those two ideas do you agree with? Do you think she was just a sadist, that she just really enjoyed seeing somebody in pain by her own hand? Or do you think that Gertrude was hurting herself in effigy by hurting Sylvia? Comment below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like, favorite, and subscribe. And I still need more punishments. Down in the comments below, I've got like one more day of these 30 days of vlogging. I will do an extra day if you guys decide I should do 2. So tomorrow's the absolute last day of daily vlogs. And then we will pick it back up next week with whatever days you guys decide. Please tell me down below as well, 2 days a week, for which ways you decide that we should be doing videos. Awesome, blossom. I love you guys. My scoops are beautiful. Now off to sleep I go. Bye.